On Christmas morning, a frozen widow with 5 kids knocked on the mountain man's door. The knock came before light. I heard it in my sleep first, thought it was a branch cracking under ice. Then it came again, harder, like knuckles that had already been hitting things for a long time and weren't going to stop. I lay still a moment, listening. Wind had been working the eaves all night, and the cold had come down hard from the peaks the way it does when December finally means it. Whatever was on my porch was real. I pulled on my boots without socks. Took my rifle from the peg not because I expected trouble, but because that's what you do when you're 12 miles from town and somebody's knocking your door in the dark on Christmas morning. I opened it, and for a moment I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. A woman, snow plastered from shoulder to boot, one arm wrapped around a bundle that turned out to be a baby or near enough to one, couldn't have been more than 2. Behind her, pressed tight against her back, were 4 more children stepping down in size like a staircase, the oldest maybe 10 or 11, and all of them shivering so hard their teeth were going like woodpeckers. The woman's lips had gone the wrong color. Her eyes were dark and fixed on mine, and she didn't ask for a single thing. She just stood there. That's the part that got me. She didn't plead. She'd already made her calculation about what she was willing to do and what it had cost her, and she was past the point of dressing it up. I stepped back from the doorway and said, "Get in." That's how it started. My name is Callum Reach. I was 44 years old, and I had been living on that mountain by choice and design for going on 11 years. I had a cabin I'd built myself from the timber I'd cut myself on land I'd bought from a man in a land office in Cheyenne who didn't ask what I was running from, and I didn't say. I had a mule, 2 horses, 6 laying hens, and a milk cow named Patience, which was a joke I'd made to myself in a dark year and kept making because it still fit. I had a smokehouse with enough elk and deer and salted pork to last me until March. I had a root cellar under the kitchen floor with potatoes, turnips, dried beans, and 4 months of flour in sealed crocks. I had a woodpile that ran 10 feet along the north wall, split and stacked by my hands through August and September, because I know what winter is on a mountain and I don't make bets against it. What I did not have was any living person who knew my first name. The trader in Ridgeline knew me as the man from the Reach claim. The postmaster held my mail, which was nothing, usually under Sea Reach. If I died on that mountain in January, they'd have found me sometime in April when the snow let go, and the postmaster would have written a letter to nobody because there was no nobody to write to. I had decided that was fine. I had decided it was more than fine, actually. I had taken what happened to me in the years before that mountain, and I had buried it in the same place I'd buried everything else, and the solitude had become not a punishment but a preference. The quiet was mine. The labor was mine. The outcome of every single day depended on what I put into it, and that was an arrangement I trusted because I had learned in a hard school that depending on other people is a way of asking to bleed. So that's the man who opened his door that morning. I got the fire high first. The stove had banked low overnight, and I opened the damper and fed it pine splits until the box was roaring. Then I slung the iron kettle over the hook and filled it from the water barrel in the corner. The woman hadn't moved from where I'd put her, just inside the door, still holding the small one. The 4 behind her clustered so close they were practically one body. "Sit," I said. I pulled the bench from against the wall and set it near the stove. She sat. The children came with her like they were tied to her by invisible threads. The little one she was holding made no sound, which worried me more than crying would have. I crossed to them and held my hand near the child's face to feel breath, and when I felt it, I let out something I'd been holding in my chest. "What's the baby's name?" I said. "Me," she said. Her voice was raw, like she'd been using it outside in the cold for hours. "Me's breathing fine," I said. Something moved in the woman's face. Just a small shift, like a door opening a crack and then going shut again. She nodded. I got blankets, the good wool ones from the chest, and I handed them out and didn't say anything about their boots dripping on my floor because my floor had survived worse. I made coffee. I made it strong and put sugar in it, which I don't usually bother with for myself, and I poured it into every cup I owned, and for the kids who were too young I mixed it half with water from the kettle and wrapped their hands around the cups and said, "Hold it. Don't drink yet, just hold it." The oldest child, the boy, watched me with eyes that were older than his face. 11, maybe 12. He'd been the one on the outside of the cluster, between his mother and the door, which told me something about him. "You got a name?" I asked him. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas," I said. Those boots are soaked through. Take them off and put your feet near the base of the stove, not touching near." He looked at his mother. She gave a small nod and he did it. The others followed, which is how children work when one of them moves first. The woman still had her coat on. I could see her shivering through the wool. There was frost in her hair where the snow had come in under her hood and then half melted and frozen again, and her left cheek had the pale, waxy look I knew from winters on this mountain, the look that means the skin has stopped knowing what temperature it is. "Your cheek," I said. "Left side, you're frosted." She touched it with her fingers and winced. "Don't rub it," I said. I went to the shelf and got the tin of lard I use for hinges and machinery, and I came back and said, "This is going to feel like nothing at first and then it's going to hurt. That means it's working." I put a thin coat across her cheek, careful, the way you'd work around something damaged. Her skin was cold as iron. She sat very still while I did it. Her eyes were straight ahead, not on me. "I'm Callum Reach," I said. "Nora Flint," she said. The story came out in pieces over that first hour. She didn't volunteer it, I didn't push, but the pieces were there if you paid attention. She'd been traveling from her sister's place in Harwood, 3 settlements east, headed back to the homestead she and her husband had filed on 2 years prior. Her husband, whose name she said once and didn't repeat, had died in October. Fever, she said, and the way she said it told me it had been fast and bad and that there were pieces of it she was still not looking at directly. She'd stayed at her sister's through November because there'd been nowhere else to go, and her husband's brother, who'd had some idea about the claim, had needed to be made to understand that it was hers and the children's and not available for his convenience. That had taken time. She'd set out 2 days ago in a wagon with a roan horse and provisions enough to make the run home in a day. The roan had thrown a shoe on the second morning on the mountain road and had gone lame by noon. She'd unhitched it, tied it to a pine, and started walking. She'd walked through yesterday afternoon and through the night. The baby me had been inside her coat the whole time. She'd seen the light from my chimney from the tree line and had come toward it. I sat with that for a moment. She'd walked through a night that had dropped to maybe 10 degrees on the mountain road, with 5 children, the smallest one against her chest, and she had kept them all moving, and she had made it to my door. I didn't say anything about that. It wasn't the kind of thing you say anything about. "The horse," I said, "you tied it." "Yes. On the upper road. About 2 miles up. There's a split-trunk pine at a switchback. I tied it there." "I'll get it this morning," I said, "after the children are warm." She looked at me then fully for the first time. Like she was deciding something. "Why?" she said. It was a real question, not rudeness. She genuinely wanted to know why a man she'd never seen before on a mountain she'd stumbled up in the dark would go out in that cold to retrieve a lame horse for her. I didn't have a clean answer. I said, "Because it's yours." She looked away again. By mid-morning, the children had thawed and begun to move around the cabin in the careful way that children do in a stranger's space, touching things lightly and glancing back at their mother. The 2 middle ones were girls, Elsa and Ruth, 7 and 9, I eventually worked out, and they found the cat I'd forgotten to mention, a gray tomcat named nothing in particular who lived under the workbench and came and went through a cut I'd made in the back wall. The girls were delighted. The cat was not, but he tolerated it, which is more than I'd expected of him. The boy Thomas had come to stand beside me at the window while I was looking at the sky. "Is it going to snow more?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Tonight and tomorrow, maybe the day after." He thought about that. "We can't leave." "Not today," I said. "No." He nodded slow, taking inventory. I recognized that in him, the way a person calculates what they've got and what they need and what the distance is between the two. It's not a natural thing in a child. It's a learned thing, and it gets learned a particular way. "Your mother," I said, "she made it here by herself through the night." "I know," he said. "I was with her." I looked at him. "I carried Elsa on my back for a while," he said. "The last part before we saw the smoke." He said it straight, just a fact. And then he went and sat down by the fire and picked up the 2-year-old me, who had finally decided she was warm enough to start complaining about things. And he bounced her on his knee and made a sound with his mouth that made her go quiet. And I turned back to the window so he wouldn't see me looking at him too long. I went for the horse before noon. Took my gelding cutter, a lead line, and the farrier kit I keep for my own animals, because the man in Ridgeline who does horseshoeing is expensive, and I'd rather learn a thing than pay for it repeatedly. The roan was where she'd said, tied to the split-trunk pine at the upper switchback, standing with its weight off the left forefoot, ears flat with cold and misery. I talked to it from 30 feet out and kept talking as I came close. She'd tied a good knot. I gave her credit for that. You can tell a lot about a person by whether they tie a good knot under pressure. The shoe had pulled clean off. The hoof wall wasn't cracked, just tender. I cleaned it out, fit a spare shoe from the kit that was close enough, nailed it as well as conditions allowed, and walked the roan back slow with Cutter setting the pace. 2 hours round trip. When I came back, the smell of something cooking hit me from 20 yards away, and I stopped for a moment outside the door with my hand on the latch. And I can't tell you exactly what I felt except that it was unfamiliar, and I didn't want to move fast enough to break it. I went inside. I had found the beans in the root cellar and the smoked pork on the shelf, and there was a pot of something on the stove that smelled like a meal, which is different from food. The children were sitting at my table, which I had never had children sitting at. The gray cat had gotten into someone's lap. The lamp was lit even though it was daytime, and the light from it fell warm across the table, and I stood in the doorway with the cold still on my coat, and I looked at my own cabin like I'd never seen it before. "Horse is shod," I said. "She'll be all right." Nora didn't turn from the stove. "Thank you," she said. "She needs a few days on even ground before she's road ready." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." We ate. It was the best meal I'd had in a year, and I didn't say so because there was no graceful way to say it without it meaning something larger than I was ready to account for. After Thomas helped me with the afternoon chores without being asked. He didn't know cattle work, but he watched what I did and then did the next thing, which is the right way to learn. The younger children had found that the barn had kittens. Patience, the cow, had attracted a barn cat at some point in the fall, which I'd been aware of without paying much attention to, and Nora let them go look at them for 20 minutes while she cleaned up the meal things and I split more wood in the yard. The sky was doing what I'd expected, piling up gray from the northwest, the particular gray that means serious weather. By 3 in the afternoon it was coming down again, fine and steady, the kind of snow that doesn't make noise and doesn't stop. I came in and knocked snow off my boots, and she was sitting at the table with the lamp and a piece of cloth she was mending. One of the children's coats, I saw, the elbow torn out of it, and she sewed with the short, economical movements of someone who'd been mending things alone for a while. Me was asleep on the bench with a folded blanket under her head. The other 3 were in the corner with the cat. Thomas was on the floor near the stove with a piece of harness leather and a knife, doing something I couldn't identify. I crossed and looked over his shoulder. He was carving a small shape into the leather. Rough, but you could see it was trying to be a horse. "That yours?" I said. "For me," he said. "She likes horses. I don't have anything to give her for Christmas." I stood there a second. Then I went to the shelf where I keep the spare leather tools, and I got the small gouging tool that makes cleaner curves, and I set it down next to him without saying anything. He picked it up, looked at it, and went back to work. That night I gave them the bedroom, my bedroom, the only one which had the proper bed and the extra quilts, and I made do on the floor near the stove with a bedroll and the spare blanket, which was fine. I've slept in worse conditions than my own warm cabin floor, and I was not going to let a woman and 5 children sleep on it while I took the bed, because that is not something I am capable of doing and remaining who I am. I lay there listening to the silence settle, and to the snow working against the glass, and to the small sounds from the other room, the shift of a child turning over, a soft murmur that was me and then quieted, the creak of the old bed frame. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. What I was thinking about was not the woman exactly, or not only. I was thinking about the cabin, the way it had felt that afternoon with the lamp on and the pot going and the children at the table. I had built this place to be sufficient, and it was sufficient for a man alone. And what I had discovered today, without wanting to and without knowing what to do with it, was that sufficient for a man alone and sufficient were not the same thing. I didn't sleep for a while. The snow ran 2 full days. In those 2 days, I learned more about what a household sounds like than I had known in 11 years of not having one. It sounds like arguing about who gets the cup with the chip in the rim. It sounds like the specific cry of a 2-year-old who has been told she cannot hold the knife. It sounds like Thomas asking me things, practical things, things about the animals and the wood, and how I'd built the chimney draw in a careful voice that was trying not to want answers too much in case I didn't want to give them. I gave him the answers. The girls, Elsa and Ruth, were different from Thomas. Less careful. They decided by the second day that I was not a threat, which they communicated by simply beginning to treat me as furniture, sitting near me, asking me things without ceremony, once falling asleep against my arm on the bench when I was reading in the evening, and their mother had taken me off to bed. I moved very carefully until Nora came back for them. She stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them leaned against me, one on each side, dead asleep. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm not," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she came and gathered Elsa up and carried her off, and I scooped Ruth and carried her to the room and laid her down and pulled the quilt over her, and Nora watched me do it from the doorway. On the third morning the snow stopped, and the sky was the hard blue that comes after. I went out before first light and cleared the yard and checked the road as far as I could see it from the upper pasture fence. It was drifted in some places but passable. The roan was moving well in the paddock. The road to town would be open by mid-morning. When I came back she was up, fire already stoked, coffee already made. The children were still asleep. She handed me the coffee without looking at me, and I stood at the window with it, and we were both quiet for a while. "The road's clear enough," I said. "I know," she said. "Roan's ready." "I know," she said again. Another silence. The fire popped. "Your claim," I said. "What's the shape of it?" She told me. It was a valley claim, south-facing, with a creek through it and enough timber on the west edge to build with. Her husband had started a house, walls and a roof, she said, but not finished inside. She'd been planning to take it up where he'd left off in spring. I thought about that. A woman alone with 5 children and an unfinished house, and a creek that would flood in March and timber to fall and season, and no one who knew her name within reliable distance. "You'll need help in spring," I said. "I know that too," she said. Her voice was level, not resigned exactly. Just honest about what the numbers added up to. "I can come down when the roads are clear," I said. "Help you finish the house. It won't take long with 2 sets of hands." She turned from the stove and looked at me. Straight on, the way she'd done that first morning when she'd asked me why. "Why would you do that?" she said. And again I didn't have a clean answer for her. Or I had one, but it was too large to say plainly without saying too much, so I said the part of it that was true and manageable. "Because your boy's going to need to know how," I said. "Thomas, he's at the age someone ought to show him." She held my eyes for a long moment. Something moved through her face, slow, like weather moving across a long piece of country, and I couldn't have told you what it was, but I didn't look away. "All right," she said finally. She was loaded and ready by mid-morning. The children were bundled into the wagon, me in the box between Ruth and Elsa, Thomas up on the seat with his mother. I'd packed them the smoked pork and a crock of the dried beans and half the flour, which was more than I should have given on a practical basis, and less than I wanted to. I came around the side of the wagon to make sure the roan's new shoe was holding. "Callum," she said. I looked up. She was looking down at me from the wagon seat, and her face in that hard winter light was tired and something else, not soft. Nora Flint was not a soft woman, and she hadn't gotten to my door by being soft, but open. The way a door is open. The way something that has been closed a long time is open. "I don't have a way to pay you back for this," she said. "I didn't do it to get paid back," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what I mean." She looked at me a moment longer, and then she reached down, just reached down and put her hand briefly on the side of my face, her palm against my jaw, and she looked at me with those dark, settled eyes, and I felt it go through me like a sound through still water. She wasn't crying. Neither was I. There wasn't anything to cry about. There was just this woman's hand on my face, and the cold air between us, and the solid weight of what I'd done these 3 days, and what it had meant to her, held there plainly between us without any dressing on it. Thomas was looking at the roan's ears, and carefully not looking at either of us. She took her hand back and picked up the reins. "Spring," she said. "Spring," I said. She clicked the roan forward, and I stood in the yard and watched them go down the road through the snow, until the wagon went around the tree line and was gone. I went back inside, and the cabin was quiet. I stood in the middle of it for a while. The bench was still pulled out from where the children had sat. The gray cat was asleep in the warm spot near the stove where me had napped. There was a piece of harness leather on the floor by the stove. Thomas had left the one he was working on, the little horse half carved. I picked it up. He'd left it on purpose. I was sure of that, he hadn't forgotten it. I set it on the shelf above the stove where I'd see it. Then I got my coat back on and went out to do the afternoon chores, and the snow was bright in the yard, and the sky was blue and sharp as a blade, and I was 57 days from spring.